a Canadian radio sanctuary podcast. Our guest is Eric Carmen. Thanks for being here, Eric. You grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Tell us your story.
Well, my father's sister has been with the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra for about almost 30 years now. And when I was about 2.5, from what I'm told, I seemed a bit precocious, and so they sent me to the Cleveland Institute of Music to take a course called Dalcroze Eurythmics, which is an elementary theory course for young children. And what it consists of is like they put you in a leotard and you dance one step, and they say that's a quarter note. And then they say, now if you dance two of those steps, that's a half note, thus teaching you that a half note is twice as long as a quarter note. I love that, needless to say. And then when I was 5, I took violin lessons from my aunt for 2 years. I hated that. And finally convinced him when I was 11 to let me take piano lessons, which is what I had really always wanted to do. And I took about 4.5 years of classical piano at the Cleveland Institute of Music.
After your classical music upbringing, were your parents surprised, let's say, by your shift to rock and roll?
In the beginning, I was about 16, and it was just really more of a hobby and just sort of something to do for fun. But later on, when I dropped out of college to be a rock and roller, then they weren't too thrilled about that. I had been working almost semi-professionally since I was about 18. I'd been in another group prior to the Raspberries that had managed to get a recording contract with a company called Epic Records, a subsidiary of Columbia in New York. And so we'd had a little bit of recording experience. And the bar scene in Cleveland is really pretty amazing. There are a lot of places to play. And there's a very big rock and roll scene in Cleveland. At the time, there were groups like the James Gang and the Raspberries in early 1970, or late 1970, early 71, all just playing local clubs. I guess maybe the James Gang might have been out of Cleveland by that time, but like 1969, there were a lot of good rock and roll musicians playing in Cleveland. So it was quite an active music scene. What happened is that in the Raspberries, we played together for about a year locally in bars, just, kind of finding out what we were doing musically. And then we made some tapes at a local recording studio and sent them to some people that were managing us in New York at the time. They played the tapes for Jimmy Einer, who was to end up being our producer. He liked the tapes. He came to Cleveland, heard the group, liked the group, and about 2 weeks later he brought back representatives from about 8 record companies. Had a little bidding war, and we signed with Capitol Records in the States.
Why did the Raspberries break up?
What happened is it was like, at the time was 1971, or not, early 1972, and we walked into Capitol Records in Los Angeles, and we didn't have real long hair. I mean, it was long, but it wasn't real long. And we didn't have beards and mustaches, and we weren't wearing blue jeans at the time. And they looked at us, there were 4 guys, and they said, geez, what is this? What are they? God, maybe they're the Osmonds, I don't know, So they decided that we were a teeny bopper band. They really had no idea what we were doing. Then they released a couple singles, and the second one was Go All the Way, and then that really convinced them. They said, oh my God, this is a big singles act. And we kept doing all these tunes on our albums, trying to wake people up to the fact that there were some albums there that were above and beyond what we were doing in our singles. And nobody really paid much attention after the first huge barrage of teen magazines published our pictures and interviews with our favorite color and silly things like that, which we weren't really into, but we were only about 21 years old or so at the time, and we really didn't know any better. We didn't know that we could say to the record company, we won't do any interviews with teen magazines. We just kind of sat there, kept waiting for Rolling Stone and Cream to show up, and they never did. And we said, geez, wonder why. And then after about 2 years of that, it was too late. So we got, it caused a lot of problems within the group in terms of the fact that everybody was very frustrated and very unhappy with the image that had been kind of thrust upon us, which we really had nothing to do with. What happened is that the group just continually, progressed along the same lines, really. About the time that we did our third album, which was called Side 3, we were in the process of really turning that corner and trying to wake people up to the fact that we're not really a teeny bopper band. Really too late to do anything about it. People were just not going to accept the band for another. If we did, it would have taken us about 3 more albums, I think, to re-educated the public as to what we really were, as opposed to what they thought we were.
How did your new solo album come about on the Arista label?
Shortly after the group broke up, my manager made it known throughout the music world that I was looking for a solo contract, and within a couple of weeks of that all happening, I think the first reply we got was from Clive Davis of Arista, who proceeded to get right on a plane and fly out to Cleveland, which is kind of a death-defying act in and of itself. He came in. I hadn't even made a tape yet of all the songs, and so he just sat in my living room and I played my piano and sang the songs for him. And he seemed very, very enthusiastic. And the next day, his attorneys called my manager and offered me a ridiculous contract. And I was very impressed with Clive as a person, you know, and as a record executive. And certainly his track record spoke for itself from Columbia. In addition, I was really very leery of signing with another large bureaucratic record company. You know, I'm not bad rapping capital in the States. They're not unlike any number of other large record companies in the United States. But the problem is that when you get an artist that, when you have 40 artists or 50 artists on the roster, it really doesn't make or break your company if that artist is a hit artist or not. I mean, you sign a guy, you hope he's a success, but you don't have to make him a success. The way a new company like Arista is more of in a position where if they were going to offer me that, you know, amount of money in contract form, what that really is it's saying to an artist, we believe in you enough that we will offer you, we'll tell you, you know, guarantee you this amount of money, and then it's up to us to make sure that you make that much money so we don't lose it. And to me, it was a really good show of faith. Most of the difference in recording had more to do with the ease of working with the band. It was very difficult working with the Raspberries because it was a supposedly democratic, equal partnership between 4 people. But unfortunately, it wasn't an equal partnership in terms of creativity or drive or ambition or, you know, all the things that really go into making a group a group. With this group, it was very clear-cut. You know, I was the leader of the group, and I wrote and arranged all the tunes and was going to sing lead on them. And this was my backup band, and they were going to come in and play. And so there was no friction involved at all, which made recording much easier. We spent a lot more time actually recording and coming up with creative ideas in the studio, and a lot less time arguing between ourselves. And we spent no time arguing between ourselves, which was a very pleasant change.
What performers influenced you the most?
Having grown up in the 60s with rock and roll that way, it was like, you know, the people that I always idolized were the songwriters, you know, the people that really wrote great songs that sort of endured beyond rock and roll, like Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney and John Lennon. So that's probably why you hear more of them probably in my music. You know, my feeling about the thing when it happened was, I really hope everybody likes this record. I'm not going to do a record now to try to sell records or to appease rock critics or to do anything at all, but please myself and please the public, hopefully. It seems that a lot of times, I mean, the Raspberries were a critically acclaimed band. All our records were just raved about in Rolling Stone and whatever, and it seemed that the only people that got into the group were the rock critics and the teeny boppers, and the great mass of concert-going people and album-buying people totally never caught on to the group. And we got sort of caught in a little time warp of sorts of, you know, always playing to that audience, the rock critics and the teeny boppers. And when I was approaching this album, I just said, the hell with the rock critics and the hell with the teeny boppers or whatever. I'm going to do an album that I like, you know, that I really believe in. I think that this is, you know, an album that I can be proud of. And I hope people like it, and we'll see what happens. And fortunately, what's happened is that it's, you know, become very successful, and I'm really, really pleased with that. So whatever security that lends is nice.